Hi, Easy Guy here. This video will cover some basics about crowd controls, staggers, and part breaks in Lost Ark. I'll first go over all of the basics in this reference image that my sister and I have made, and then I'll cover in-game of some of the applications and how you can use the knowledge to your advantage on raids, bosses, and PvP. So let's first get started with the type of crowd controls. The main type of crowd controls that exist in the game are flinches, displacements, and status effects. Flinches are just basic attacks on enemies, and I'll just show you in game. I think that'll be the best way. Flinches are just regular attacks, or almost any attack onto an enemy that briefly immobilizes and renders them useless, like they can't act. It can be chained indefinitely onto mobs such as this one, but they cannot be flinched indefinitely onto players because of diminishing return. So if you ever saw that scale symbol when you were PvPing someone or you're spectating and you see a scale symbol, that means that they've reached a diminishing return, which is based on the number of hits rather than the time that they've been CC'd. So the next type of crowd control is displacement. So displacement can be a knock down, knock up, or knock down. Knock down, knock back, knock up. Sorry. So those can be found through your skills individually. You don't have any natural way of getting those crowd controls outside of using skills that describe that specifically say that the skill knocks back, knocks down, or knocks up. So for example, this is a knock up into a knockdown. This is a knock back into a knockdown, and this is a pushback. So this also counts as a displacement. So one thing to note about displacements is that not all things can be comboed. You cannot combo a knocked down into a displacement, another displacement, which is a pushback. So you can't combo a knockdown into a pushback. So knockdown into a pushback. He stays still. However, you can combo a knock up into another knock back, or knock back into another knock up. Okay? The next up we have status effects. So status effects are above both flinching and displacements. You can achieve them through skills specifically that say that it has one of the 5 different types of status effects, and the status effects can be found here. It is stun, fear, tremor, shock, and freeze. So all 5 of those will bypass any form of displacement super armor. And speaking of super armors exist in 3 different forms. There's flinching super armor, there's displacement super armor, and there's status effect super armor. And like I mentioned, there's different hierarchies for these: flinching, displacement, status effect. So if you have status effect super armor, you'll be immune to all forms of crowd control. But if you only have flinching super armor, then you can be displaced and you can be status affected. So make sure you are aware of which of your skills have different kind of immunities through super armor. Outside of that, you just have to be aware of what kind of crowd control you're being hit by. A lot of the boss's attacks, such as auto attacks, will flinch, so you can bypass the crowd control by using an attack that has flinching super armor. But bosses also have attacks that will displace, and you can't bypass or eat that attack with a flinching super armor. You need a displacement super armor, and displacement super armors for the most part are displayed through a tripod looking like this, right? So this is your most common form of displacement super armor. Most classes do not have status effect super armor through natural means. Classes like destroyers, maybe warlords have it, so do keep that in mind. So make sure you check your class's toolkit in order to make sure your class has super armor for the different types of crowd control that exist in the game. Next up, we have staggers. So staggers can be classified as another form of crowd control that's specifically for boss monsters. So monsters that are not regular monsters, that are immune to displacements, or immune to crowd control or status effects entirely, like raid bosses, have a stagger bar. Now raid bosses, obviously you can't see their health bar, so you can't see their stagger bar, but they do have it. And stagger skills can be classified with the rating of stagger that they have. So it goes from low all the way up to extremely high, with medium rankings in between ranks. So medium high, medium low, and for the most part, the ranking is the most important part about the stagger damage. It doesn't matter how much damage you deal with the skill. It doesn't matter if it critted, if it didn't. What matters is the skill's stagger ranking, as well as some of the tripod choices that you can have. So to give you an example in game, here we go. So in game, another thing to note about stagger skills is that even if the attack doesn't say it has a stagger skill like this one, it does stagger very slightly. So if I were to hit this guy 3 times, it does stagger very slightly. Okay, so if you can see, this is a no tripod level 1 skill, and it did very small amounts, almost less than a centimeter. That's like what, half a centimeter. Whereas if you put 10 points into it and went with a tripod that doesn't just one that increases damage, and you spawn the same guy, there we go. Now this skill will do significantly more damage because it's level 10, but as you can see, it's still the same amount of stagger. So the damage and the tripod choices often don't matter as much if the skill remains the same baseline skill. So this skill, all it did was it increases attack speed through its tripod and damage. That's it. However, there are some skills that change drastically upon using tripods. So for example, this moon kick goes from this at level 0 to this on level 10. So those are 2 completely different skills. They will still deal the same amount of stagger damage if you land all of the hits. So if I can show you, if you land all of the hits and the tripods themselves don't affect the stagger damage, because the skill is changing from a combo skill to a normal skill, it does change the structure of the skill itself, so it will deal with different amounts of stagger damage, and tripod choices will affect the stagger damage that skills can deal. But some skills are not affected by it, such as this one, whereas other skills are affected by it, such as this one. I misworded it in the beginning. So if you want to know if your tripods are making an effect on the skill, like if it's making an effect on the amount of stagger damage that it deals, definitely check it out in the training room, because it's very important. So for example, that hit poorly. I'll use this guy. So if I were to hit this guy, oh, that applied late. So this guy, I don't know why, but it sometimes applies very late. I'll use this. So I hit him, it deals up to here, right? So I'll stand right on this marker. It's about to the inner ring of this outer circle. If I remove the tripods and spawn the same guy, and I don't get hit, and I hit all the skills, as you can see, it's now to the outer edge, meaning it did different amounts of stagger damage depending on the tripod choice. And that is very important because some skills are affected even more by the tripod choices than you might expect. And the extreme example is this one. So this is Battle Master skill where it buffs you with attack speed and movement speed. Now if you were to take this to level 10, you can take a tripod where it deals damage upon use. And normally a skill that does no damage or no stagger damage at all will now deal stagger damage. And the reason why is because it is just a regular skill that does damage, and skills that do damage will deal minimum amounts of stagger damage by default. Once your skill, let's say, gets another, once your skill says it deals stagger damage, it means that it deals noticeably more. It doesn't mean that it doesn't deal stagger damage at all if you have skills that don't say stagger. It just means that when you have stagger ranking on your skill, it deals way more stagger damage than a skill that doesn't have a description. So stagger damage is kind of confusing, especially when you try to interpret its rankings and how good some of the skills are. In a lot of cases, even if it says super high, it can be a little bit lower than medium high. Or like if it says high, it can be lower than medium high depending on what kind of tripod choices you can have. But as I showed you, some skills are not affected by tripod choices, whereas other skills are greatly affected by tripod choices. So make sure you understand what tripods are affecting your staggers before you go in and say, oh, I don't have enough stagger damage, or oh, I have a lot of stagger damage, when you could actually have not as much as you think, or way more than you might think. So that's been stagger damage. Stagger damage can also be found through battle items. I'm not sure if I mentioned that, but for the most part, stagger damage is a very important part of bossing. So do keep that in mind. The most important takeaway from stagger is that damage does not affect it. Only tripod choices and skill choices do. Okay? So don't worry if you didn't crit it or had a huge damage boost that made you hit really hard. What matters is that the skill is being used. Next up, we have part break. Part break is relatively new concept for some people. Part break is related to very specific set of bosses and very specific set of mobs. Certain named mobs and certain bosses will have parts that you can break, and the prime example is shown down here. We have the turtle, Guardian Rate 5, the scorpion, Guardian Rate 6, and Firebird, Guardian Rate 7. There's also, we haven't found any use for penetration yet, so we'll have to see when that comes into play. But stagger can be achieved through part destruction as well. So in Guardian Rate 5, you have to destroy the turtle's armor in order to deal more damage to him. And the way you can do that is by using destruction bombs. With Nakrasina, the scorpion, you have to cut off its tail. And the way you do that is by using cutting skills. And skills will naturally have, some skills will naturally have these destructions built into them. So for example, this Rising Dragon skill, this one, naturally has level 2 of part break on destruction. So it has destruction level 2. This first skill right here for Battle Masters has part break cut level 1. And the most important part is the fact that it is cut, the type of part break, and the second most important part is the level of part break. So most bosses will be broken after you reach a certain level of part break, so it kind of adds up. So the best example I can give is Nakrasina, because not many classes, in fact almost no classes outside of Berserkers and maybe a couple of handful of skills from some of the other classes, have cut available in their toolkit. Not many classes have cut. So Nakrasina's tail can only be cut consistently through the use of battle items, and you can use the training shurikens, which has part break level 2, and if you use 11 shurikens, then it will cut off its tail, which means your party of 4 can use 3 shurikens each, and if you miss 1, then you can still cut off the tail, but if you miss 2, you won't be able to cut off the tail anymore. So by that logic, every single boss's parts has a set level that it needs to reach in order to be cut off. I don't know, I'm not sure what it is for Turtle, because there's a lot of skills that classes have that do have destruction as part of its part break, but not many classes have slice, or cut, which is why I mentioned Scorpion. One of the most important parts about part break is this green bomb right here. This green bomb increases the level of part break on the hit enemies by 1, which means it makes your training shurikens go from level 2 to level 3, and it can make the blue shurikens, the cutting shurikens, the more expensive one, go from level 3 to level 4. So it can really save you on battle items if you just use this one green bomb. And because it applies to the enemy, everyone in the party gets benefit from it. So the part break mechanic is fairly straightforward. You just need to have the right battle items. You just need to make sure you're hitting the right parts in the case of certain bosses. And you just need to make sure you're aware of which skills have what part breaks. Part break as a concept isn't being used too often, but when it is being used, it is one of the most important parts, or it's one of the most important aspects of the Guardian raid. So you won't be able to beat Turtle if you don't bring destruction bombs. You won't be able to beat Scorpion. Well, you can, but you won't be able to make him nice and calm and easy to beat if you don't bring slicing shurikens. Because when the Scorpion still has its tail, he's very his damage potential is way higher and is extremely dangerous compared to when his tail is cut off. So just make sure you're bringing the right stuff, make sure you're bringing the right battle items and the right skills to deal with the kind of part break that you might have to do. We'll see in the future if there are more raid bosses that require these part breaks, but for the most part, just make sure you're prepared. That's mostly it. So once again, there's been crowd controls, there's been staggers, and there's been part breaks. If you guys have any questions regarding all of the information that I covered in the video, then let me know down in the comments. The reference image will be made available on my webpage as well as my Google document. So keep your eye on that. And other than that, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.